This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Well, 8-4 is not great, but if this is the floor, it could be worse. I'll explain next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Gordon. Waits for it. It's caught. This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And the leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Second. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
They'll win it. They'll win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team, and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again.
Go Blue, welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. And the Wolverines taking on the chin from Ohio State once more. And yes, like many of you, I'm starting to feel like it's forevermore. Quoth the Raven. We'll get into that and more here this week on Michigan Podcast. But first, I want to thank our friends and partners who help to make this show possible each and every week. Detroit Sports Podcast, which helps us get the word out about what we do here each and every week. All of you who tune in each week here on YouTube or subscribe on iTunes as well, please subscribe to both of our iTunes and YouTube channels if you have it within the kindness of your heart, particularly this Christmas Advent season. Could you write us a positive review, either here on YouTube or on iTunes? It does help to promote what we're doing. So many of you have told us since we started this several moons ago, boy, you guys do such good work. More people, I only wish more people knew about it. Well, one of the ways they know is if you subscribe, share the link, and write positive reviews, because people do look at it and say, hey, I don't know, that thing looks like it's okay, but it's got a couple dozen reviews. It's not that big a deal. Then they'll look at it and think, wait a minute, I think it's got a couple hundred reviews. That's something I want to check out. Well, that's how you can help us help you help us. All right, so please write us a positive review. All I want for Christmas, other than to stop freaking losing to Ohio State and everything, even hockey now, some positive reviews on iHeart and I'm sorry, on iTunes and also on YouTube here with Michigan Podcast. Also, you can follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. And if you ever miss anything we write or say or do, MichiganPodcast.com. And if it sounds like I'm frustrated, I am. I thought Nick Baumgartner kind of nailed it in his column a few days ago for the Detroit Free Press. I'm not panicking. I'm just frustrated. I'm just tired of losing to Ohio State in everything. Like literally everything. Like literally everything that matters, we lose to them. And I'm just kind of tired of it. I'm kind of tired of the fact that I don't have any butterflies in my stomach or any anticipation about playing them anymore. It's not anticipation. It is resignation. You know, my 11-year-old son, well, he'll be 11 in February, who's become a Michigan fanatic, he doesn't see what the big deal about Michigan and Ohio State is. It's not a big deal to him. Why? Because he's only been alive to see Michigan win this game once because they've won it once in the last 15 years. So it's not that big a deal to them. I tried to show them, we went on YouTube here and watched the 97 game, the 2006 game, back when both teams were worthy of the rivalry simultaneously. I tried to show him what it was like, and he kind of got it, but he's like, yeah, that was a very winnable game on Saturday. Now, one Ohio State writer said that Michigan outplayed the Buckeyes at 21 out of 22 positions. I wouldn't quite go that far because I'm pretty sure that when Josh Metellus decides to put together his NFL audition tape, 0 film from Saturday's Michigan-Ohio State game will be included because that's not a good look by Josh. He played pretty wretchedly. However, we've wondered all season long, how much of Michigan's struggles on offense have been the quarterback? You're starting 3 different quarterbacks, and the last time Michigan started 3 different quarterbacks in a season was 1984. They went 6-6. Well, Steve, Ohio State won a national title with their third-string quarterback. That's kind of true. I mean, Cardale Jones was battling J.T. Barrett for the backup spot at the start of camp. But remember, Braxton Miller got hurt at the start of training camp that year. He never played it down at quarterback. And then J.T. Barrett and Cardale Jones battled for the starting job once he got hurt. So Cardale Jones was never really, he was the third quarterback, but never really third string. All right, it's usually your third string quarterback's not very good, like anywhere. Most NFL teams don't even dress a third string quarterback. All right? But we wondered, what would happen, if our offensive line figured out in week 11, 12, 13, or 19 how to actually block like a defensive line stunt? What if we ran the ball against a good team at more than 4 yards a clip? Would that lift the quarterback up? Or would the quarterback play drag it down? Well, we got our answer on Saturday, all right, because Michigan averaged well over 4 yards a rush against Ohio State. Pass blocking was pretty good, too. Probably the best it's been against a quality opponent all year long. But we still had John O'Korn at quarterback. Now, I know some of you are going to say, well, Stevie's a great kid. I'm sure current alleged menace to society Baker Mayfield visits sick kids in the hospital down in Norman, Oklahoma, too. All right, so this idea that you can just suck if you're nice, I don't really get into that. I mean, if you give me a choice between you're a douche canoe and you're great and you suck and you're nice, with all due respect, I did sports talk radio for many years. I don't ever recall doing a show where I gave out the number and said, hey, here's our team's graduation rate. Call in, let us know what you think. Ever heard that? You ever called in? You're like really fired up, man, really fired up about your team's graduation rate. You call your local sports talk show. Hey, I just want to talk about, all the academic honor rollees we got. I'm just really fired up about that. No, never happened. Yeah. I got it. Your team lost the biggest game of the year over the weekend, but you waited on hold to call the post-game vent show because you wanted to note all the do-gooder acts the guys on the team did during the week, and that just totally excused the fact that your hopes and dreams were crushed once more. No? Yeah, see, I've bought a lot of Michigan stuff over the years, the MDen and other places. I've never seen for sale, we do good works but don't win games. Sure. You ever seen that? You ever bought one of those? No? Not really interested in one of those? Yeah. Me neither. So I'm sure he's a really nice kid. I wish him well. By golly, I'm praying to Joe Boo as we speak. I don't ever see him play another meaningful down at the University of Michigan. I can't handle it. I just can't. And you can tell he can't. Because there's just I'm not very good, and then there is I'm really aware of the fact I'm not very good, and I'm going to press and make myself even worse than I already am. And we saw plenty of that on Saturday. It was just a brutal display. Statistically, he might be the worst quarterback that's played here in the modern era. And there's a reason he effectively was our third-string quarterback. And I don't blame him. It's not his fault. He has a limited amount of ability. Just because of circumstances, that's what we got stuck with. And look at a program like Florida State. They started the year number 3 in the preseason poll. They're ending it by scheduling a game against Louisiana Monroe so they can get to bowl eligibility. What happened? Starting quarterback got hurt. Got to play a rail-thin freshman. Those of you, by the way, wanting Dylan McCaffrey to play, who I think might weigh $150, soaking wet, take a look at what James Blackman's doing for Florida State or not. They're 5-6. I mean, James Blackman should have spent an entire year as a redshirt getting stronger. He's not ready to play like Dylan McCaffrey did this year. So sometimes circumstances just conspire against you, and that happened for us this year. I mean, the injuries at quarterback. I cannot believe how many tight windows I saw opposing quarterbacks complete passes against us this year. And you just throw up your hands and just say, you know what? It's just not our year. And it's not. When will it be is the question. See, I think the future's very bright. And I told you here on this podcast a few weeks ago, these next 4 games are going to be the time that try our maize and blue souls, okay? Because we had Wisconsin on the road, Ohio State, then a bowl game against maybe a ranked team, and then we open at Notre Dame next year. Now, I think, in my own opinion, I think we've played the 2 toughest games in that March. That doesn't mean I think it's easy to win the next 2, but I think we'll win at least one of the next 2. Wouldn't shock me if we won them both. When I look at our roster next year, and yes, I think we play a tough schedule, but when I look at those teams we play and what they have coming back, I think the only team on our schedule whose roster matches ours is Ohio State. I think we found ourselves a quarterback in Brandon Peters who can competently run the offense. I think if he'd have been the quarterback on Saturday, it's likely Michigan would have won that football game. That's how bad the quarterback play was. And I don't know that we need to say anything more about poor John O'Corn. I'm glad he stuck it out, got his degree from a fantastic institution of higher learning. Hope he has a great life and just never plays another meaningful down of football here ever again. But other than that, blessings. And now we move on. And we move on, and another year of recruiting where Michigan has an opportunity to finish strongly there with another good class under Jim Harbaugh. Won't be ranked as high as the previous 2, but its average star rating is still going to be somewhere around the top 10 in the country. You look at the amount of players we have coming back, I think the interior of our offensive line next year with Bredesen, Onwenu, and Cesar Ruiz is going to be really, really good. It's possible, depending on what Chase Winovich chooses to do, he's basically the guy we're going to wait on as far as declaring early for the NFL draft or not. But we've recruited very well at that position as well. We have players waiting in the wings, but with Rashawn Gary and Chase Winovich potentially returning together a defensive end, that's the kind of stuff, Miami teams used to have in the 1980s. Bookend defensive ends that can get upfield on their own. I think Aubrey Solomon, he may not be instantly as good next year as Maurice Hurst was this year, but I think he's good. He's cut right from the same cloth and will be a force there in the middle. I look at the speed and athleticism we return in the skill positions. We return in the back 7 on defense. I think this is going to be finally the team the next 2 years that we were planning on. And let's not act like these first 3 years of Coach Harbaugh have just sucked, because it's not true. I mean, Jim was won the most games in 3 years here. That's been won in a 3-year period in 15 years. Last 2 seasons, he's placed 14 players on the All-Big Ten football team. I mean, 3 years ago, we were a national laughingstock. SportsCenter was running features on whether we disregard our players' safety. Urban legends were circulating on message boards that Michigan was giving away tickets to its final home game if you bought a Coke Zero. I mean, it looked like, a counterculture demonstration on campus from the 60s, the way that we had the on-campus revolt against David Brandon. Then we made the coaching change after a dreadful season, and everybody in the media told us we had no chance at Jim Harbaugh, and there really wasn't any solid information at all that we were going to get him until the very end, so we just sat there firing our coach shortly after the Ohio State game, waiting one of the longest months I've ever had as a Michigan football fan. I'm sure I'm not alone, because we had no idea if Jimmy doesn't come home, we had no idea what Plan B was. And we're getting reports that guys would rather coach at Duke than Michigan, and we can't land anybody, and we're a joke, and we're a laughingstock. Harbaugh gets hired. It's going to take 3 to 4 years, is what the Fox crew said the very first game of his career against Utah on that Thursday night. Oh, it's going to take 3 or 4 years to build Michigan back up. We've been ranked in the top 10 19 times since Jim took over. We won 28 games. I think if we would have known on December 28th, 2014, the day Jim was hired, maybe it was December 30th, somewhere in there. If we would have known that would be our record the first 3 years, I think we would have taken it. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't blemishes. 1-5 against our rivals is just not acceptable, and I think everybody recognizes that. In fact, I think the people in Schembechler Hall are probably far more pissed off about that than we are. Probably far more driven to do something about it than some keyboard commandos and message board jockeys are, or some schmuck hosting a podcast on YouTube, for that matter. I think that this entire season this year, our entire complexion is different if we beat either Michigan State or Ohio State. I think then we're 9-3 with a young team. I think it's the fact that we didn't win either one of our meaningful rivalry games. In fact, I'm more disappointed in 2016 than I am in 2017. That team, you have 19 pros on that team, and you lose 3 out of your last 4 games by 5 points. That was a window. That was a missed opportunity right there we should have had, and we didn't. This year, I think, was probably much more to be expected given what we had to replace. But still, that loss to Sparty at home as a 2-touchdown favorite. Change that game around. Win that game by, I don't care if you win it 2-0 by a safety. That changes the whole complexion of this season, in my view. So yes, it's valid to be frustrated. I am very frustrated. But I'm not panicking. Well, Steve, how can you have so much faith in Coach Harbaugh? It's because you're Harbaugh slappy. You've said that. You wore his number when you were a kid. Well, I would like to think that has nothing to do with it, but I'm human, so I can't guarantee that. So how about some data? Would you have faith in a coach whose resume took Stanford from a 2-win program to a 12-win program and a perennial power? Took the San Francisco 49ers from almost a lost decade to perennial playoff contender, 3 straight NFC championship games, a Super Bowl, and left the NFL with what's still a top 5 all-time win percentage by coaches who've coached at least 4 years in the NFL. Would you trust that resume? Because that's the resume of the coach we have. And I can't think of a coach we could get that would have a better resume than that. Now, resume only gets you so far. Eventually, a resume has to translate to results. In these next 2 years, I really believe, is when we're going to start seeing that. This portion of Michigan Podcast brought to you by Sport Court of Michigan. If you're looking to put the ball in your court, like how much would you like that maize and blue Jumpman to be your actual court? Well, Sport Court of Michigan, they can make it happen. From basketball to tennis to batting cages to hoops, if you need anything athletic in your backyard, just give them a call. They're based out of Michigan, and they're ready to install your court sooner than you would expect. If you are in the southeast Michigan area or in Ann Arbor, Tim Barnes will personally walk you through the process of having your dreams of a professional court in your backyard. Just visit him at sportcourtmi.com. Now, if you live outside of southeast Michigan and you need a hoop for your driveway or your yard, they've got you covered there too at monsterhoops.com. That's monsterhoops.com, and they'll ship it right to your door. Now, if you mention the Michigan Podcast to monsterhoops.com, you're going to save $100 on your purchase at monsterhoops.com. If you mention Michigan Podcast to sportcourtmi.com, you could save up to $1,000 on your backyard game court, depending on the package you have selected. So sportcourtmi.com, michiganpodcast.com, and for that discount, tell them that Michigan Podcast sent you. And joining us again this week here on Michigan Podcast, our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and the Michigan Insider on the 24/7 network. Good to see you, Michael. How are you?
I am doing very well, Steve. New location again. Now I'm in my kitchen this week.
It's kind of like, where in the world is Michael Spath, right?
Yeah, once at Pizza House, once in my chiropractor's office. This week I'm in my kitchen. Maybe next week I'll be actually, it's a pretty nice day out. I almost thought about sitting in the back deck, but it's just too windy for that right now.
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed not to see all the affirmations behind you. I hope you've coached yourself up and you're ready to go this week. Hope you're motivated.
Well, I'm actually wearing my St. Francis of Assisi basketball coach's shirt right now. I've got a game later today, so I'm totally in the right mode for coaching and being positive as much as this Michigan football team will allow us to be positive right now.
Great. St. Francis of Assisi, author of one of the great hymns in the old church, All Creatures of Our God and Kings. I pulled out a little Theo nerd credentials there. Right, yeah, did I impress you a little bit with that?
You did. I'm always impressed when people can pull out either scripture or they can go back and look at history and talk about a certain person in history that did something pretty incredible. So, yeah, that just completely blew me away. I didn't know you had it in you, Steve.
All right, well, now that I've established my Theo Nerd street cred, let's talk some football. All right, so Michigan goes 8-4. I opened up in a monologue this week on the show with an anecdote that Doug Skeen over at the Wolverines shared on their podcast this week, and he talked about one of his very first team meetings, his freshman season at Michigan. And it was 1988. Bo Schembechler walks in and starts pounding the table about how 8-4 is not acceptable at Michigan. Those are not our standards. That cannot happen again. And Skeen was like, I don't know, I kind of thought 8-4 was pretty good, but not around here, I guess. And that set a message right away for the freshman class that he was a part of that would go on, by the way, and win the next 4 Big Ten championships. So 8-4, is it acceptable? Is it understandable given the youth of the team? What's the big picture here, Michael?
Well, you don't think it's acceptable. I don't think it's acceptable. Most of the former players like Doug Skeen and Ron Simpkins and Steve Morrison and Benny Joppru that I talk to don't think it's acceptable. Unfortunately, when you have 10 years of malaise like this Michigan football program has had, and you're used to losing to Ohio State and you're used to losing to Michigan State, I think what ends up happening is the entire fan base becomes accustomed to losing, becomes accustomed to 8 and 9 win seasons being the pinnacle. And they almost look at it and say, hey, it's good enough this year. It's never good enough. I don't care that this was a rebuilding year for Michigan. This was a transitionary year. The fact of the matter is at the very worst, they should have been 9-3. They should have beaten Michigan State at home. The fact that they lost to the Spartans as a 12, 14 point favorite in that game, it's unacceptable that they lost to Michigan State. And the way that they were going to make it better, the way that they were going to come out even, was to win one of their final 2 games. Well, guess what? They had golden opportunities against Wisconsin on the road. They had probably their best opportunity all year to really have that marquee victory and beat Ohio State. And again, they came up short. And I don't know. I mean, I get criticized for being too hard on this Michigan football team, for being too hard on these young guys. But to me, like, at some point, enough is enough talking about how young they are, talking about how it's a transition year, talking about how it's a rebuilding year. You know, I saw someone post the other day that they said, maybe you saw this tweet too, a rebuilding year, the rock bottom for Brian Kelly's 4-8, the rock bottom for Mark D'Antonio's 3-9, rock bottom for Jim Harbaugh is 8-4. But Steve, I look at that and I kind of laugh because we have no idea if that's what rock bottom is. Mm-hmm. I mean, in all fairness, like, he could have a 6-6 year, and then that might be rock bottom. Like 8-4, no one said that this is rock bottom, but no one should be excited about this either, as this is the type of season that they had, because they didn't rise up and beat a single team that they weren't supposed to beat. They lost to a team that they were supposed to beat. I don't know. This is not my Michigan. My Michigan doesn't settle for an 8-4 season and say, well, that was good enough. That's just, I grew up just like you grew up on the 80s and the 90s and national championships and Big Ten titles. And when I sit here and listen to a fan base talk about how 4 wins was okay because they went into the season expecting an 8-4 campaign, I just shake my head and say, God, like, what has happened to this fan base that this is good enough? It's not good enough for me.
Is it a malaise, Michael, or do you think it is faith in who the head coach is, what his resume said coming in, the youth of this team, and the amount of quality talent that he has returning? I mean, we were last on Phil Steele's experience chart coming in. I started off our very first episode of Michigan Podcast. I went through the last 4 years of recruiting. I did not include fifth-year seniors because a lot of programs don't retain them that often anymore. A lot of these kids go pro early, or if they're not going to play, transfer out. So we don't have fifth-year seniors. The rate of retention is not what it was with that in the 80s and 90s. So I just looked at the last 4 years of recruiting rankings and went through every school in the Power 5, what they were ranked on the 24/7 composite index, and looked at their rosters in terms of retention. And what I found was Michigan had about the 17th most talented 4-year roster foundation in college football, slightly behind Penn State. But of all the teams on my list, by far, they had the most talent residing in their freshman and sophomore classes. It was about 75% of their total roster points were in Harbaugh's first 2 full complete classes in 2016 and 2017. So do you think people are just looking at that and saying, you know what? The national media told us all offseason we were probably going to go 8-4, 9-3 with this much youth. We didn't want to believe it. Turned out they were right, and we're really excited about the future. Do you think it's that, or is it a malaise?
You know, I can understand people being excited about the future. There's no reason you shouldn't be excited about the future. But something you just said there, Steve, and I don't want to go off on like this huge tangent or anything like that, but you said how Michigan lacks the fifth-year seniors that because that was a big thing this year.
I don't just mean Michigan, but I mean systemically in college football, we don't see them like we used to. Yeah.
No, you don't. But if we're just talking about Michigan for a second, because I've already talked about the youth and how young they are, and they are young. But look at, Michigan under Jim Harbaugh has treated this program to some extent like an SEC program, like the fact that nobody is guaranteed a fifth year, the whole getting processed out of the program if you're not competing up to the standards that that they want. And no one seems to bat their eye about that. And yet, let me ask you this question. And I don't know who those players are. I haven't gone back and done an extensive search on this. But if you take the last 2 years, and there's been players, fifth-year seniors, that could be fifth-year seniors, but were processed out of the program, is this still the youngest team in the country in 2017? Or do you have a situation where you've got more fourth- and fifth-year seniors, and no longer are you the youngest? I mean, let's face it, the reason that they're the youngest is certainly some of it recruiting, but Jim Harbaugh's also made it the youngest because he's gotten rid of a lot of those guys that would otherwise be coming back for a fifth year under Lloyd Carr or under Brady Hoke. So when we say it's the youngest team in the country, part of that is his doing, and that doesn't mean that they're not, and that doesn't mean that they were supposed to win a national championship this year. But let's just not completely say well, he was hamstrung by the recruiting of the people before him, because part of it was him wanting this direction, wanting to be able to sign 30 kids in the 2016 class, wanting to be able to sign 30 kids in the 2017 class because he wanted, quote unquote, more talent. So look at even now this year, we're talking about Maurice Ways and Drake Harris and Ian Bunting and Lawrence Marshall and, Wilton Spade has already decided to leave. And look at all these guys that could come back as fifth years and give experience. But instead, Michigan doesn't want to sign 16 to 18 kids. They want to sign 23 to 24 kids. And in order to do that, they're going to have to push fifth-year seniors out the door. So that's where I come down to this idea that they're always going to be too young, or they are too young. Is part of that is just, as you said, Steve, how college football is going and how Michigan's going. So if we're going to always reset our expectations when they're young, when are they not going to be really young? Next year, maybe not, but in 2 years, a lot of those guys that are going to be juniors next year, Rashawn Gary, Lavert Hill, Devin Bush, could all be leaving for the NFL. Ben Bradison could be leaving for the NFL. And now you've got a young team again. I just don't like the youth argument because everybody is getting younger and younger, and you're going to have to find a way to win football games, essentially with second and third year players. You're no longer going to win with fourth and fifth year guys, especially when you run a program like Alabama, like Ohio State, and you don't want those guys to stick around for 5 years.
I think those are really valid points. In fact, I think we're probably saying the same thing from a different vantage point. I mean, the idea of senior-laden teams. Okay, if you go back to previous eras of Michigan football, in 2006 they started 11-0. The year before, they were 7-5 and lost as a double-digit favorite to Nebraska in the Alamo Bowl. You go back to in 1997 when they won the national championship. The 4 years prior to that in a row, they went 8-4. You go back to what Bo thought was maybe his best team post-1970s at Michigan, the 1980 team. The year before, they were 8-4 and lost their last 3 games in 1979. You go back to Jim's 2 teams that both finished in the top 10, one at number 2 and one, I think it was at number 8 in 85 and 86. The year before, they were at 6-6. But what you could see was injuries cycling up. That was an era where senior-dominated teams largely dominated college football. You're right in that youth is served in this day and age in the sport. I've pointed out before last year in the 4 teams in the playoffs, in the college football playoffs, all of them started at least 9 freshmen in their college football playoff game, and they all started a true freshman on the offensive line, and the number 1 team started a true freshman at quarterback. If you look at the teams that are looking at playing for the college football playoff this weekend, Wisconsin, sophomore quarterback. Miami, sophomore quarterback who's a first-year starter. Alabama's kind of out of it, but they have a sophomore quarterback. Jarrett Stidham in Auburn is his first full season as a college quarterback after transferring over from JUCO after leaving Baylor with the controversy there. Georgia, true freshman quarterback. So you're right about that, but that's why I probably should have drawn this distinction. It's not that the talent is in the freshman and sophomore classes. It's that the talent for Michigan was in the first 2 classes that Jim has had a chance to recruit. I agree with you. When we're sitting here in 2020, and a lot of the players that we're excited about the next 2 years are gone. If we're sitting here at 8-4 talking about youth, something smells rotten in the state of Denmark, Hamlet. I'm with you on that. Okay, but we'll also be like 5 or 6 years into his recruiting. Yeah. He's only had 2 full recruiting class. I think that's more of an issue issue than what the actual class distinction is.
You know, and I think back to what you originally asked me was whether or not there's malaise or whether it's just more of this excitement for the future. There is a lot of excitement for the future, and I get it, and I completely understand. And you look at what you've got coming back next year, and your quarterback situation should be stronger than it was, at least in terms of the talent. You're going to be better at wide receiver. You're going to be better on the offensive line. You're going to be better every single spot, including defensively. But here's what I think you and I are both in 100% agreement in, and what I actually am hearing from a lot of Michigan fans is I thought they were going to start running from 2018 because I thought the people that have really been apologizing and essentially saying like we were expecting too much too soon from Jim Harbaugh. I thought that they were going to start pushing the goalposts a little bit further away in 2018 and 2019 and saying, okay, it's going to happen. It's too soon to happen in 2018. The stars aren't aligning. But no one's really seemingly doing that. They're pushing back and saying it has to be 2018. And so I'm there. 2018 has to be the year because the excuses are out. At the same time, Steve, you and I have talked about this. This schedule is brutal. And until we see Michigan win a big game on the road, how can you pick them to beat Notre Dame, Michigan State, and Ohio State on the road next year? You got Penn State, Wisconsin, Nebraska at home. So when I look at 2018, I have two different ways that I'm looking at this. My expectation is that there are no more excuses, that they've got to go out there and win a Big Ten title. That's going to be my expectation for this program. That said, my prediction for this program is going to be different. My prediction is going to be 9-3 or 8-4 because I haven't seen them come close to winning that big game yet.
I think that's fair. I think when I look at next year, and we'll have 9 months to break that down. But I said on our show here a few weeks ago, and we're talking to Michael Spath from WTKA Ann Arbor and the Michigan Insider here on Michigan Podcast. I said here on our show a few weeks ago that this next 4-game stretch to me was it's always darkest before the dawn. That we're sitting here trying to break in a redshirt freshman quarterback with a couple of key injuries and a very young team. And our next 4 games were at Wisconsin, Ohio State at home, a bowl game against likely a ranked team somewhere, and then you open up at Notre Dame. But I think we've already played the 2 toughest games in that 4-game stretch. I didn't think we'd go 4-0, but I didn't think we'd go 0-4 either. I think we've played the 2 toughest games. When you look at our bowl game, I think if you play a Stanford in a Holiday Bowl, I think that's a team that plays a style very much like ours. They also have a very young quarterback. I've watched Stanford play a lot this year. They're not quite as good on defense as they have been in years past. There's even talk about Lance Anderson, who Jim tried to hire as his original DC when he came to Michigan, maybe taking the Oregon State job, but I think we would match up pretty well with them. I think when you look at I actually would much rather play Stanford in the Holiday Bowl than Arizona because I think the narrative of losing to Rich Rod, and I think it's possible with the young kid that they have at quarterback there, with the way our DBs turn their back on quarterbacks on 3rd down, I think Khalil Tate could run for 150 yards. I'd much rather play Stanford. Notre Dame loses a lot more than I thought when I looked at their roster a lot more closely. That entire offensive line is basically getting decimated. They start several seniors on defense as well. They don't have as much coming back as I thought. And I actually think when I look at our schedule next year, man 1 through 22, I think the only team on our schedule that has as much or more talent than we do is the team we play at the end of the year in Ohio State. And we have played them very well the last 2 weeks. In fact, I saw you guys' film study I saw what you were tweeting about your film study this week, and you thought that there were a lot of plays left on the field that with even competent quarterback play, Michigan should have won that game.
Well, a couple of thoughts from what you just said, and a lot of good stuff there. When you look at whether these last 2 games were their hardest games among the next 4, you could be right. When I look at Ohio State, and I think this was really disappoints me, Steve, is that I don't think Ohio State is as good as the team that beat Michigan State 48-3. I don't think they're as bad as the team that lost to Iowa. I think there's something in between. I think this is a very, I don't want to say average Ohio State team, but average compared to what they've had in the past. I think this is a very beatable Ohio State team. I think this is a very, probably like on a scale of 1 to 10, probably like a 7.5. And last year was probably a 7. And both times Michigan could have beaten them and didn't beat them. And that's what drives me crazy about it, is because Ohio State might have these last 2 years been as down as they're going to be under Urban Meyer. And both times Michigan couldn't come out with the victory, and both times they didn't. Next year, yes, JT Barrett's moving on, but Haskins looked pretty good. Mikey Weber and J.K. Dobbins are going to be back. Most of their skill players on offense are going to be back. Most of their defense is going to be back. Nick Bosa, just similar to Rashawn Gary, is only a sophomore. Most of their best players are going to be back, and it's going to be on the road. I think next year's game is going to be far harder than this year's game was for this Michigan football team. And so that disappoints me, is that, again, we're talking about what could have been instead of what was. And Michigan doesn't seem to figure out how to rise up and win those games that are winnable games. When you look at, again, those 4 games, Notre Dame loses a ton, but you know what? Michigan State was the 3rd youngest team in college football this year and came into Michigan and won. Iowa on the road last year. What is Michigan's marquee road win in the 3 years of the Jim Harbaugh era?
I mean, we haven't beaten a ranked team on the road. I believe it is 4,619 or 21 days. That was September of 2006 at Notre Dame. Yeah.
So you're looking at probably Michigan's marquee win on the road so far in the Jim Harbaugh era is Michigan State in 2016, a Michigan State team that went 3-9. I am not trying to be a naysayer and be hard on this team, but my God, why would anybody in a prognosticating role pick Michigan to win a tough road game against a ranked team when for 3 years every opportunity they've had to do that, they've come up short? Why would a Michigan expert, someone that follows the team, pick Michigan to win against a top 25 team when in each of the last 3 years, every opportunity they've had where they've been facing a top 25 team and been an underdog, they've come up empty? To me, that is what is so frustrating about where we are in year 3 now is it was going to be a transition year, but you've had multiple opportunities in each of the first 3 years to go out there and win that big game, and every time they've failed. Every time they have failed so far. And so why am I going to all of a sudden buy in that just because they're a year older, they're a year more experienced, they've got all this talent come back, that they're suddenly going to get over the hump? That's not about talent. To me, that's not about talent. That's about having a mentality. That's about having the mental toughness. That's about having that winning culture and edge. And I don't know, Steve. I'm just not sure it's coming back in 2018.
Well, we see this in college football every year. I mean, Georgia hadn't been ranked number 1 in the country in November since Herschel Walker. They did it this year. Miami had not had a regular season where they won 10 games in the regular season since 2003. They did it this year, and they even lost a regular season game because of the weather. I mean, we have seen this. Teams make these sorts of radical changes and break streaks and strings and paradigms all the time, but they often do it when it's not expected. Miami was thought to be a year away. Georgia was thought to be a year away. All right. So your points are very valid as well. And I'm glad you brought up the culture thing, because John O'Corn said something after the game on Saturday that I just found damned mystifying. All right. He was asked what happened when Michigan was up 20. The one time I truly believed, I didn't think we had a chance all week long, didn't think we had a chance all pregame. I never had any pre-Ohio State butterflies like I have my entire life, with the one exception. The last time this happened was 2008 and 2009 under Rich Rod. All right, I just wanted to get the game over with and get on to the future. When I started to believe it might happen, that we might actually get the break that always goes against us, it's when we're up 20-14 and JT Barrett gets knocked out of the game. All right. And the play of the game to me is the third, and it's 3rd and 13. They've had back-to-back false start penalties, and redshirt freshman quarterback goes back, throws into a tight window in double coverage. And by the way, have you ever seen a team give up more completions in tight coverage than Michigan did this season? It was unbelievable the windows some of these quarterbacks threw into against us and completed. Alex Hornibrook did it like 3 times. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, Haskins throws into double coverage, probably a bad read. Their guy comes down with it despite the collision, and they never punted again. The only time we stopped them the rest of the game is when they missed a field goal. John O'Corn is asked about this after the game, and he said, and I quote, "I think guys just got a little bit complacent." Michael Spath, you're in Ann Arbor, man. I'm in Des Moines. All right, so help me to understand. You've got one win against your big rival in 15 damn years. How the hell do you ever get complacent? Can you explain that to me? I did not understand that.
I have no words. I don't know, and I hadn't read that quote. I hadn't seen that quote. I don't know. That doesn't even make any sense to me, because what are they complacent about? They're up 20-14 and they're they're resting on their laurels at that point. I don't know that I buy that because.
Was he maybe saying, hey, the backup quarterback's in, we thought we got this, it was over? Is that what he was trying to think?
That could be what he's trying to say.
Okay.
That's the only thing I can think he's trying to say. Because even on that play, Brandon Watson is battling his butt off, and Tyree Kinnell is coming over the top to make a hit. I didn't see anybody loafing after they went up 20-14. I didn't see Michigan giving this one away by a team that just stopped competing. So I don't really know what he's saying there. I think, honestly, no offense to John O'Korn, but I think every comment and quote that he came out of his mouth after the game on Saturday, we should probably just throw in the dumpster, because I don't know that he made any sense. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was so emotional after that game. He was so upset about his own personal performance that he was probably just saying things because he didn't know how to make sense of what was going on in his own head. He was surreal. He was in shock. He realized, my goodness, I kind of single-handedly blew this game for my team. And it's hard as a fan, it's hard as a commentator, because I feel like you and I have both been a little bit, you want to get out there and you want to get aggressive, and you want to say, like, this is what happened, this is who's to blame. And then you get to take a step back and you're just like, what am I going to say about this kid or about this performance that is even fair to anybody? I mean, everybody saw with their own eyes what took place. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows Michigan wins this game if they get competent quarterback play. So I just haven't spent the last couple of days ripping him, because I don't feel like there's any need to. Like, I don't see it's not going to accomplish anything. It is what it is. We all saw with our own eyes how bad it was, and so there's just really no reason to jump down on that kid's throat. But yeah, I don't know that he made any sense after the game because of what the state of emotional hell he was in. I don't buy that. I don't buy the complacency thing. What I would buy is what you brought up earlier, third down and long. How come in every third down and long situation, Michigan is playing man-to-man still and not moving into a zone and not giving one of their two safeties a chance to come over the top, not giving the quarterback something else to look at that exact moment? Mm-hmm. Every single time they're still running their man-to-man, and that's burned them not only in the passing game where you're essentially saying our three cornerbacks plus our safety are all going to match up with one guy and hope that all four of those guys in every single third and long wins that battle. But where it's really killed them, and this is a Haskins long run, this is JT Barrett's long run, is in those situations when you've got every single guy, including your linebackers, man-to-man, and you're not spying the quarterback, then you've got those guys with their backs to the quarterback starts to take off, and guess what? He's got tons of room to run because nobody's keeping their eyes on him.
Well, you just explained why I don't want to play Arizona in a bowl game, Michael. I can't even imagine the offseason narrative if they can't corral Khalil Tate and lose to Rich Rod in a bowl game. I don't even want to contemplate that. Okay, it was like the best Michigan basketball team I can ever remember. In 86, I literally cried after the game. We lost to Iowa State in the second round of the 86 NCAA tournament, and our former coach, Johnny Orr. But people really liked Johnny Orr and didn't want him to go. And we didn't have social media back in 1986. I cannot even imagine the memes. There'll be more memes about Michigan football if we lose to Rich Rod in a bowl game than Chris Christie's gotten in the last year and a half. And I don't want any part of that, Michael. I don't want no part of that whatsoever, brother. None. No. Michigan ought to be, Ward Manuel ought to be on the phone to the Big Ten office saying, we don't care if you send us to freaking Saskatchewan. We ain't playing Rich Rod, but thank you. Okay? Thanks.
Well, one of the interesting ones that I've heard is if they could go to the Pinstripe Bowl and play Notre Dame and finish their season with Notre Dame and open their season with Notre Dame next year. And you know what?
Could you imagine Michigan and Notre Dame in New York City with all the alums both those schools have at Yankee Stadium? Frankly, these bowl games never really mattered much outside the big ones when we were kids, but now even less so. If I had my druthers, if we're not going to be in a New Year's Six bowl, I would rather have us go to the Pinstripe. All the New York media attention, all the New Jersey recruits that are right there for a good solid week. That's become maybe the most important state in our recruiting at the moment. I'd pick that bowl game. Who cares anymore about whether you're Holiday Bowl? That doesn't matter like it did 10 or 15 years ago.
I honestly don't care where they go. I don't care who they play. If it's Rich Rod, I get the subplot and I understand what the hesitation and what the concern is there. But if it is, so be it. If it's Notre Dame in the Pinstripe Bowl, I'd love to go out to New York City. That's a great place to visit. If it's Stanford in the Holiday Bowl and it's in San Diego and there's an opportunity to recruit there, I really don't care. To me, 2017 is really over with, and everything going forward here is about 2018. It's about starting Brandon Peters in that game. Here's our worst nightmare is if John O'Korn starts the bowl game. I don't know why he would. I expect Brandon Peters to be back and healthy, but I don't want to see John O'Korn in a Michigan uniform ever again. It's all about going forward here. It's about Brandon Peters. It's about the offensive line. I'd like to see, we had this conversation on Inside the Huddle yesterday, I'd like to see Cesar Ruiz be the center in this game if Michael Onwenu is healthy, because why not start to build the chemistry and the cohesion and the experience in the interior of the offensive line. I'd be okay with not starting Mason Cole in the game. I would take every senior with the exception of Maurice Hurst on the defensive tackle, and I'd probably start somebody younger than them, because there's no, I understand that most times they want the seniors to go out with a victory, but screw that. This is no longer about 2017, about these senior class. They had their chance to help this younger group rise up. It didn't happen. Everything's about 2018, so get every single guy that's critical of 2018 some experience in the bowl game and give them a chance to start. So, give me a new left tackle. Give me give Ben Mason the carries over Khalid Hill. Give me every single spot. Someone else, Devin Gill at linebacker instead of Mike McCray. Every single spot, give me someone younger, because it's all about 2018 at this point.
Go coach those kids up over there for St. Francis of Assisi, brother. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to having you on the show on Wednesday.
All right, that's Michael Spath from WTKA Ann Arbor and the Michigan Insider on the 24/7 Sports Network. Back with more here of Michigan Podcast in a moment. Again, we're so thankful to all of you that are helping us to make this podcast possible each week by supporting us on Patreon. I put out a free podcast on our Patreon page. If you've never visited it before, Post Maui Classic. I put out a free podcast on men's basketball. There it is right there. You don't have to be a supporter. You can just go there and listen to that for free as a nice little sample of what we put out there for our supporters each and every week on our Patreon page, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. And yes, we're going to keep doing these. I won't do them after every basketball game because there's just simply too many, but we will keep putting those up there sporadically during the college basketball season, and I'll come up with other content items we can put up there during the offseason as well, as a way to say thank you to all of you that support the effort we're putting forth each week to do this little show called Michigan Podcast. Next up, it's our final edition of Football 101, our final film session of the season. Former All-Big Ten All-American tight end Benny Jopru sits down with Michael Spath and breaks down the film of the game.
Welcome to Football Film Review. I am Michael Spath. We're breaking down the Michigan-Ohio State game. A new guest, Kyle Freilich, former Michigan offensive lineman, substituting in here for Benny Jopru. And here we are, 10:34 to go in the first quarter, and a 24-yard pickup for Chris Evans. Kyle, what happened here?
It looks like we ran a little misdirection play here. Started everybody to the left. Got all the defensive eyes thinking we're going to the left, and then cut it back. And McCune gets a great block on his pull back to the right, and everybody gets a hat on a hat.
And obviously, it's important. They weren't great sustained blocks, but Eddie McDoom, Cesar Ruiz, and Donovan Peoples-Jones all getting up to the second level and just giving Chris Evans enough room to run the football.
Absolutely.
The first really nice pass completion for John O'Korn after he'd already missed a couple of easy throws. This at 9:08 of the first quarter and about a 27-yard gain to Zach Gentry. Kyle, you obviously start up front. What did you notice up front before they were able to get this ball off?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty good protection for the most part. They double-teamed Bosa there, and he kind of split the defender, or split the, I think it was the tackle and the guard, and they let him get through into O'Korn's face a little bit, which probably made the pass a little high, but it still got completed.
He obviously, this is a tough throw. Gentry out there, running just a little bit of a seam route. Good to see him stand in there and take that hit and deliver a perfect pass.
Definitely, and like I was saying, Gentry making that catch while he's getting hit after dropping that pass last week against Wisconsin, so it looks good like that.
5:56 to go in the first quarter. One of the things that you really want to see, Kyle, as the year goes on, is players getting better and better, and Khaleke Hudson is one of those players, and here does a terrific job diagnosing what he's seen in front of them and also making the play. Tell us what happens.
Well, a lot of times at the beginning of the year, Michigan was getting beat on the edges, and Kalik Hudson recognizes that they're going to hand the ball off here. I think it's to Paris Campbell, and he just darts up the middle, and I don't think Mikey Weber was even ready for him to be right there, because you see him bounce off there, and then Kalik makes a great play and gets in there on that tackle and makes a play for a loss.
Yeah, it looks like Mikey Weber's going up to the second trying to get Devin Bush, so he's thinking that the tight end is probably picking up Kalik Hudson. And Kalik just, the ability to push through two guys and still get your hands on the guy shows great strength, great speed, and great instincts.
Yeah.
30 seconds left in the first quarter, and Chase Winovich comes up with a big sack on third down here. Gets around his man, shows terrific determination. What stood out to you about this play, Kyle?
They had good coverage in the secondary, which is always going to give your defensive line time, and obviously JT Barrett didn't have anyone to go to. They actually had pretty good protection, but like you said, just great effort by Winovich to get around that tackle and keep going to get the sack.
You're an offensive lineman, so you want to take this guy upfield, and he does that. How does Chase Winovich still get the sack after being taken upfield?
Well, as a lineman, you're thinking in your head that you've got to maintain that block for, you're thinking a couple seconds, and then hopefully JT Barrett's getting the ball out. But like I said, there's just great coverage, and he had no one to go to, and he wasn't going to run for a first down. So,
Kyle, we have one untimed down to end the first quarter, and it's a really interesting play because Michigan kind of ran something similar earlier in the game. They line up just three offensive linemen in the middle of the field. A couple guys are out, spread out. Mason Cole and Juwan Bush-Bader spread out. And what were they trying to achieve here? And could they have scored a touchdown?
It looks like they could have scored if you were watching the play. It was a little read option, and both of the receivers that are in the backfield are running out like they could catch a pass. If Kugler goes up to the middle linebacker and Ruiz stays on that down lineman, then you're freezing the linebacker with the read play, and it looks like we could have had a touchdown right there because people are so spread out.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it was a very clever, and like you said, the defensive players on the outside even bit that they're wide receivers because the wide receivers look like they're about to take screen passes, and so they bit on those, and so you really isolated those four guys in the middle and really three guys.
Yep.
The first play of the second quarter, Michigan on a goal line, 14:57. At this point, they've run the ball 15 times. They've run the ball to Khalid Hill on every short yardage situation. And so it's no surprise that the linebackers already bites on the play fake leading to the Sean McCune touchdown.
Yeah, it looks like they all have their eyes inside and they're thinking that they're going to hand off to Hill. Like we do quite a bit of the time down there in the red zone, or at least inside the 5-yard line. And they all bite, and Bosa feels like he's going to try to hold on, and he misses.
Yeah, you look at it, they're both linebackers come in, and give John Corn a little bit of credit because he had somebody in his face and was able to make the pass that he needed to make even with somebody in his face.
Yeah, he's missed, I believe, 3 passes that are pretty much wide open already in the game, and he finally, which may have led the linebackers to believe that he might not be able to complete a pass right there, but he ended up making a great throw.
This is Ohio State's first touchdown. JT Barrett on a 20-yard keeper. And a little bit of confusion in the Michigan defense. Mike McCray, Tyree Kinnell, not on the same page. Mike McCray's not spying the quarterback. What do you think happens here, Kyle?
It's hard to tell if they're playing man or zone coverage here just because the field is so short. But it looks like they're in man, and McCray they were either in quarters and McCray was supposed to pass it off to Kinnell, or McCray just read it wrong and missed the tackle.
And he obviously, the hard part, the confusing part is that he kind of goes with them as a underneath receiver that Lavert Hill is on. And so he just doesn't really know where he's supposed to go, and he's not spying Barrett, and Barrett has an easy touchdown.
Yeah, it looked like he was almost taking on a block when that receiver came down with Lavert Hill, and that set the screen for Barrett to get in the end zone.
An interesting blocking scheme from Michigan up front. Springs Karan Higdon for a 22-yard run.
Yeah, they're blocking down with the tight end and the guard. Mason Cole is just kind of doing a skip pull where he's jumping outside and getting on that defensive end and pushing him out. And then Kugler gets around both Bredesen and I believe it's Gentry. He gets downfield and cuts one of those DBs, which is always a hard block. And then Karan Higdon just runs really hard, breaks one tackle, which you're always asking a running back to do. Unfortunately, he steps out of bounds there, and then he puts the hammer on Damon Webb. It
looks like with Gentry here, is he blocking down? Is he just luck out that he's blocking down onto a linebacker, or is he supposed to take this guy?
I think that he's looking. If it comes across your face, you're always going to take it.
So it could have been a defensive end.
It could have been a D end if he came across too. But he may have been looking for that linebacker, and then the guy came across his face, and then you're taught to take him.
We saw this play, the first play for Michigan offensively in the game, and the first play of the second half for Michigan. Kind of a wing tee. You've got two tight end sets. You've got Ben Mason and Henry Poggi. What do you think Michigan's trying to do? Are they trying to go the distance? I mean, what is this play designed to do here?
I really kind of think that they're just trying to make sure that they get positive yards on first down and maybe get out ahead of the sticks a little bit. Make O'Korn a little bit more comfortable in what we're doing and knowing that, we're going to impose our will on here and then get a few yards and then go from there.
We never saw this again, but I wonder if this is supposed to set up something else.
Yeah, I mean, I wondered if maybe, it's a play-action pass where somebody like Gentry or even Wheatley, who can run a little bit, gets out when guys are thinking that we're just going to power it through.
Last couple of weeks, teams have been running, complex stunts against us and giving us a big-time problem. Here, Rashawn Gary runs it. Devin Bush gets in there. Why is he so hard to pick up, and how is this effective for Michigan defensively?
Well, Mo Hurst gets a good push. Obviously, he's great at that, and he's taken up two defenders there. And the other thing is Josh Uke on the outside getting so far upfield that he's given Devin Bush an area to get through. But then Rashawn Gary just does a great job because Billy Price does get his hands on him, but Rashawn Gary just rips through that and gets home for the sack.
Lawrence Marshall is in here too, and I think Lawrence Marshall actually gets the attention of both the center and the left guard. And by the time the center recognizes that Rashawn Gary's coming, it's too late.
Oh, yeah, I guess that was Lawrence Marshall right there in the middle that did a great job of picking up both of them.
43-yard screen pass to Cole Crawford. We haven't seen a lot of this. Mason Cole makes the key block here. And, Kyle, why does Michigan use a left tackle to get out there and make this play as opposed to a wide receiver or a tight end?
It's looking like a little misdirection here again. We're trying to get Ohio State's attention off to the right. And then Mason Cole just does a great job of slipping out, and he gets a great stab on Denzel Ward, and then gets out in front of Jordan Fuller too to spring Cole Crawford.
How important is it, that little fake, in order to allow Mason Cole to get the time to get out there?
I mean, it's really important because if they don't bite on that fake, then Mason Cole's going out there and somebody's following him out there the entire time.
2 yards out, Karan Higdon gets in the end zone. Terrific blocking here by McCune. Khalid Hill, take us through it here, Kyle.
Yeah, we're blocking down from the left side, and we're going to pull Ruiz around. Khalid Hill gets a great block, kick out. Ruiz gets out to his guy. There's no penetration, so Ruiz gets through cleanly, and then it's just one-on-one with a linebacker and Karan Higdon, and he just runs hard and puts the hammer on him and gets home.
Well, they always say, I mean, if you want to put your running back in a one-on-one situation, most of the time it's going to try to elude the linebacker here, but when it's 2 yards from the end zone, he just puts his head down and can overpower the guy.
Yeah, I mean, you're hoping that he's coming down hard enough that close. You're not trying to make a guy miss. You're just trying to get over the end zone.
9:40 to go in the fourth quarter. Michigan down 24-20, Kyle, and they throw a fade, a little crisscross with wide receivers, and great pass and catch here.
Yeah, McDoom does a great job of getting his head around and adjusting his body to make that catch.
What is obviously the key starts up front with the pass protection. John O'Korn, we've just seen miss an opportunity, and so when you miss an opportunity, what does it take to come back and just throw the ball up there and hope and get your guy to come down with it?
Yeah, I mean it was a three-step drop that we got enough protection to give O'Korn time to get that ball off, and you just got to hope that he still has the confidence to get that ball in there, and it was one of his better throws on the day.
Our final play that we're doing for this football film review is the interception, 2:47 to go. What is John O'Korn? What is the read that's going on here that he's making, his wide receivers are making, and where did it go wrong?
Well, the read that they're both making is what the safeties are doing, and there's safety high, and Cole Crawford runs the correct route. If he's in man coverage and the safeties aren't there, then he's going over the top, and that's where O'Korn's throwing it. But the safeties are both there, so Cole Crawford sits down, and O'Korn proceeds to keep throwing the ball deep.
It's just something that, as a fifth-year senior, a guy with a lot of experience, you would not expect that type of read to take place at that point in the game.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, that's it seems, obviously it's easy to say sitting here watching it in replay, but it seems like it's a a pretty easy read to make, especially even if you're not looking at Kekoa Crawford. Zach Gentry is wide open down the middle of the field, and it almost seemed like John McCorn panicked a little bit.
This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you what grade would you give Michigan's 2017 football season. 18% said B, 19% said D. I love this answer. 10% said ask me after the bowl game. 53% gave the answer that I would have given. I'd give this season a C. There was progress, not as much as I would have liked, and we didn't really win any of the meaningful games on our schedule, although the overall record, given how much of the roster we had to replenish, was pretty good. So I'd put it right around the Mendoza line. That brings us to our question of the week from Chris Hotchkiss, who writes, are you weary of the "these are just kids" line? In past generations, they were deemed men at 18 as they marched into world wars. The kids line is used in sports as a cover for every kind of bad behavior, or, as you state, a shield for criticism. Yes, I'm very tired of it. I have no regard for it at all. Now, that doesn't mean be a total douche canoe, right? I mean, those of you putting out, dropping racial bombs or making it personal or death threats, I mean, seriously, I think I speak for humanity when we wish your daddy would have wore a prophylactic that night. You're just a piece of human debris. That's just terrible. Get a life, really, losers. But, I mean, they're not just kids. When it costs me the gross domestic product of a third world country to buy season tickets for my family to go to every home game, don't tell me they're just kids. When you're selling personal seat licenses and banner ads and you've got quadraphonic media displays and essentially dual movie theaters at either end of the stadium in high definition, don't tell me they're just kids. All right. When the Big Ten is paying out per school over $40 million in television revenue, don't tell me they're just kids. They're not kids. All right. We've got people younger than John O'Corn dying in Afghanistan, sadly, forevermore. Apparently, that's never going to end. We have that happening right now as we speak. They're not just kids. Okay. And the fact that, he does good works. Well, that's a false choice. Would you rather have a good team or a team of do-gooders? If it's a team of do-gooders, cool, charge me $10 to get in, not $100, okay? If it's just about being do-gooders, charge me $1 a T-shirt, not $20. Why is it $20 a T-shirt, not $1? Why is it $100 a ticket and not $10? Because it's not about being do-gooders, it's about being good at the sport. Now, I would prefer that the guys we find that are good are also good people. And for the most part, Michigan's been exemplary in doing that. Okay, but I think I speak for most fans of most schools and most teams and most sports. I really just watch my favorite team because I want to win. What's driving me is winning. And this idea, too, that unless you're a total canoe with death threats and racial bombs and all that other garbage we talked about, the idea that me pointing out John O'Corn statistically is the worst quarterback in Michigan, in modern Michigan history, I have people, you're attacking him. The truth isn't an attack. Your stat line's not an attack. It's just your stats. It's just the truth. Do you really believe, seriously, did you ever read Schembechler's autobiography? Second week in a row I've mentioned that here. Do you know how many times he points out in his book, he told different players, you are the worst lineman in the history of intercollegiate football. You'll never play it down here. You're the worst. Fumble in practice. Jamie Morris, who went on to become the leading rusher in school history. You're the worst running back of all time. We shouldn't have recruited a kid who's 5'6". You suck. Get out. Do you really think reasonable criticism is harsher than what gets said behind the walls of Fort Schembechler? If it is, then no wonder we can't beat Ohio State. Come on, man. Seriously. Listen, I get we don't want to be vile and be complete canoes, but we don't have to be freaking moist wipes either, all right? For what it costs to watch, to take part, to be a part of this and enjoy your team, nothing wrong with wanting them to be good and demanding you get a product worthy of paying out $13 million a year in annual salaries for a football coaching staff. Nothing wrong with that at all. Chris, did I answer your question? I don't know, but I feel much better. So thank you. This week, if I was on the college football playoff committee, this would be my top 10. I'd have Oklahoma number 1, Clemson number 2, Auburn 3, Wisconsin 4, Georgia, Alabama, Miami, Ohio State, USC, and TCU. We really only have 2 spots open in the playoffs. And when you look at 6 of the teams that control their own destiny, or 4 of the 6 teams that control their own destiny are going to play each other. I think the only real drama will happen if Ohio State wins and Oklahoma loses. Because I believe Ohio State, if they win and Oklahoma wins, Alabama's getting left out. They're not leaving behind. Now, I'm not. Well, you're a Big Ten honk. Really, I just learned today that Michigan has led the Big Ten in sacks and tackles for loss 2 years running. Do you know how many holding calls have been called on our opponents in 18 Big Ten games and passing down situations? 2 in 18 games. Because I guess we just blocked everybody perfectly. So Michigan led the league in sacks and tackles for loss, but on the downs, they didn't get home. Their opponents blocked them perfectly. We've had our opponents on passing downs in our last 2 years of Big Ten games have been called for a combined 2 holdings. Ohio State's opponents, 8. Wisconsin and Penn State's, 7. Michigan, 2. And after that slappy fest of officiating we saw in Columbus last year, this ain't about being a Big Ten honk for me. Frankly, I will laugh until I pee myself, change my undergarments, and then pee myself again if Ohio State wins on Saturday in the Big Ten Championship and gets left out. I'm going to belly laugh all the way to the 4th of July next year, okay? But I don't think it will happen. I don't think there's any way the most powerful commissioner in college football is having his champion with 3 top 15 wins being left out of the playoff so a second team from the SEC can go who has 1 top 15 win and just lost their last game by double digits. All right? So we'll see. There's my Heisman ballot this week. Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, and Kerryon Johnson for Auburn, who's carrying his team. Finally, my all Big Ten team. You'll notice on offense, no Wolverines there. But look at the defense. I've got several Wolverines on my all Big Ten defensive squad. Offensive Player of the Year, I think it's J.T. Barrett with his career numbers. I think it's Josie Jewell as the Defensive Player of the Year. Coach of the Year, I'm going with Jeff Brom at Purdue. I mean, that was a dumpster fire. He's got him in a bowl game year 1. I got to give him props to that. Jonathan Taylor, easy, Newcomer of the Year. That's going to do it for this week on Michigan Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Yes, the season's over, but we're still here each and every week. Don't miss us here on YouTube and iTunes. Subscribe, share the link, let everybody know who we are, and go Blue.